Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. Hey, I have just an amazing treat for you. This episode in the four after at five total, I'm joined by Bill Ruprecht. Bill is one of my favorite clients I've ever worked with globally. He's the former CEO of Sotheby's. He was a CEO worldwide for about 15 years. And we work together all over the world to train their top art experts. And there's two reasons I think you need to listen to this and watch or listen to this episode and the four after it. One is it's a really interesting look into the world of high-end art, how estates work, how high-end collectors work, things like that. And that's thing one. And you're going to see similarities in your business from what in the stories that Bill shares. But the real reason, the second reason I want you to pay attention to this one in particular is Bill himself. He's one of the smartest and most talented business developers that I've ever worked with. His storytelling ability is fantastic, and we're going to get into how he actually, how he sort of got into business development here in this first episode. It's super interesting, and I can't wait to share it with you. So before we get into it, if you are pressed for time and you want to deepen relationships, probably all of you know that you can go and get our latest thought piece on the 7 ways you can deepen relationships each in 5 minutes or less. It's called High Impact Relationship Deepeners, and you can go grab that at the URL growbigplaybook.com. growbigplaybook.com, sign up there, you'll get it right away, and it's really, really powerful. We've had so many clients tell us this has really changed the way they think about deepening relationships. So with that in mind, with that background, here's Bill Ruprecht on the moment that he started to realize he wanted to do business development, that this was a good thing for him, and all evolved. Hey, Bill Ruprecht, I'm excited to have you on the show here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. As you know, everybody's already heard all about you and how highly I think of you. I think the first question I'd love to ask you, and I remember you sharing this with me, so I think it involves a rug department, but I might be wrong. When did you first start thinking about business development and that it's a good thing and it can be helpful to others and it's something that you want to do?
Well, I'm sitting, Mo, in a house that I've lived in for the last 30 years. That when I was lucky enough to buy it, it was owned by a man named John Weinberg, and John ran Goldman Sachs for a whole generation and really took it from being a very traditional place into the modern world. And whenever anybody asked John Weinberg what he did for a living, he said, "Oh, I'm in sales." And he was an incredibly modest, self-effacing guy who was really committed to long-term relationships. And I spent many, many years in a business where there were really two kinds of business development. One is sort of gunslinging. You go into a room with some poor soul who's faced with relieving themselves of great deal of value in works of art. They don't have a lot of experience at it, and they're typically scared to death, and they don't know a lot of the right questions to ask. And so they're very influenceable, if you will. They're hanging on to things which are not necessarily central to what is going to end up making a good decision. And then there's another kind of business development work, which is cultivating and building long-term relationships. And that's in some ways easier than walking into a room where you don't know the client and they don't know you. And there's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on the line where they're maybe making a decision based upon the color of your necktie or whether or not the way you phrase a certain concept is sympathetic to their worldview. So those are sort of two ends of the spectrum, but in aggregate, I think you inevitably come to understand that building relationships and finding ways to build relevance to customers or potential customers is absolutely central to certainly any business that I've ever been involved with. There are probably only three ways you can differentiate a business, Mo. Um, you can either be an innovator and make things that nobody's ever made before, or you can be cheap and you can provide the lowest cost service of anybody on earth. And It's a good way to differentiate yourself. Or you can be customer centric. You can know your customer and know more about them than anybody else in the world so that you can hopefully at least get a first call on any transaction or opportunity that they want to pursue.
Well, I want to go deeper because I've heard you tell stories to other people about this kind of thing, but our audience hasn't heard it in the way I have. So when you think back to clearly you were the relationship master. You even when you were running an entire very large organization at Sotheby's, you were the key relationship person for very high end collectors, and so you had to be in the trenches with them. So when you think about developing relationships, how did you go about doing it?
Well, two things. Number one, um, there are lots of ways to run a company, and I think it's very dangerous to be the chief salesman because uh, all of a sudden you represent a roadblock. Because if you don't have systems and processes and agreed upon teams doing a variety of things, you tend to really screw things up. Because nobody should own a client. You should all be working together in a variety of situations. So that's your playbook as a business, building that kind of infrastructure. But when the situation demands it, either because you've got a lot of history with somebody or other, or because in some cases a client just demands that somebody or other like a president or a chief executive show up for any key discussion. And if it's the right piece of business, God bless them. They should be in a position to expect that, regardless of the size of the organization. It's it's something or other which I think probably the most central thing to figure out is empathy. How do you find a way to build relevance with that customer other than just cutting the price of your services? What can I do over a period of time that's going to make this character both remember me and feel sympathetic to what I'm going to ask of them?
I remember you telling a story. We were working around negotiation with a group, and somebody asked you, "Gosh, Bill, how many of our transactions, how many of our times do we get a consignment, whatever it is it purely on price versus purely only on relationship? We're the only people who get a look, and then of course stuff in the middle that yeah, it goes out to bid, but trying to get it to you or whatever." What was your math on that? And you don't have to. It doesn't have to be necessarily the art business. It could be everything because you've worked with lots of people and lots of organizations as you think about your clients. What 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 is your take on people's typical view about it's 100% out to bid and all that matters price, or it's 100% a relationship or this middle ground?
I'd say there's a couple of different kinds of generic scenarios that tend to be out there. When you're dealing with a big estate, for instance, or a divorce circumstance, um, and these are people who typically are served by a whole fleet of lawyers and fiduciaries, and the architecture of that kind of advisors is that they like to justify their existence getting paid, you know, God bless them, several $1,000s an hour to sit there and take notes while you're singing, trying to sing for your supper. Um, they really like to push on price, and I understand it because it makes it possible for people to make decisions based upon differentiation in that arena. I think it's a terrible way to make a decision because think about somebody or other who goes to work for you, Mo, and if your narrative to them is, "I really want you to come work for me, um, uh, but I'm not going to pay you a bonus," if you do a great job. I'm going to pay you as little as I can possibly pay you. Um,
Hmm.
it's just it's bewildering, but it is the tradition in an awful lot of the business that I come from, that people like to uh, chase your margin down to the point where whatever happens on a deal, the outcome's not really relevant to you as the provider, which is a terrible mistake. Giving people the opportunity to ring a bell is a much smarter decision. I mean, I've been in other situations where, uh, with very often some of the grand old men and women of the legal profession who'd been at it for 50 years or more, who in one case I'd been taking bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches for the last 5 years. He just loved the way a cook who worked for us could make a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. And so about 4 or 5 times a year, we'd show up with a bunch of bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches in his office. And I don't think it really made any difference when he had a major estate that he wanted to give us, and he listened hard to a bunch of people who could have given him, I'm sure, a perfectly good result from the business. But in the end, he called me up and said, "You know what? You've been really good to me, and I want to be good to you. If you're prepared to do X, Y, and Z, the business is yours." And that makes you feel awful good, whether it was the BLT or whether it was something else that you did along the way.
Well, and a little bit of both, knowing you. And I think that's the perfect ending to this episode because it comes back around to cultivating long-term relationships. And I love that story where you invested before there was a deal on the table. You invested in them as a human. And I think one of the things I remember from you is just how good you are at deepening relationships over the long haul. And that's a fun example because it sounds like you won a big estate sale by doing that. So, Bill, thanks for being on the show on this one. Everybody, listen, follow or subscribe. We got 4 more episodes coming. We're going to get more insights from Bill as we go forward. Thanks, Bill.